What is up, Arena Mages? This is Arjuna here with the Arena Craft podcast, and today I'm going to go into one of my favorite decks, Temur Adventure. This deck has been getting some more press lately with the banning of Reclamation and Teferi. It's just basically opened up an opportunity for this deck to shine again in the meta game, and a lot of people are thinking it's currently one of the best decks to be playing in the standard format. So because of this, I thought now was a good opportunity to just revisit the deck and go over some of the play patterns. First things first, I want to credit Aaron Gertler as the person who chiefly developed this deck. He is still the master, and so if you ever want to know anything about this deck or want to see some really high-level play of the deck, I'd highly recommend checking him out. He streams regularly on Twitch, and he still plays Clover quite regularly. So that's a really good resource. He's also released some videos on YouTube. Some of them might be a little outdated now. But anyway, just great resource for everything Clover. So I'm no master of this deck. I'm certainly not as good with it as Aaron is. However, I have been playing it for a long time, and I feel like I have a pretty good handle on how the deck works and some of the more interesting lines that you might see playing it. One of the things that I think keeps a lot of people from playing this deck is that it has a reputation for being really difficult and really punishing to play. And while I do think that there's a very high ceiling on how good you can be with the deck and how well you can do with it, I think that it's not as hard as people think it is. And I would just really encourage you, especially if you have the wild cards already crafted, if you have the cards crafted, I would definitely encourage you to give it a try because it's just really good. So basically today we're just going to go over the deck and give you kind of a reminder of how it works and then do a little bit of play with it to see what some of the lines are. So let's go into the deck list. The first thing is that the core of this deck is that we have two cards which take advantage of all of our adventure creatures and give us advantage from having them in our deck. So the first one is Edgewall Innkeeper. So this is one of our big card advantage engines. We draw a card every time we cast the creature side of an adventure creature. It's nice that it's a cast trigger, so that means if someone wants to counter your creature, you still get the card out of it. This is one of the things that makes this deck so good against control and basically any counterspell strategy because they just can't trade one for one with your spells. The other card which really makes this deck tick is the Lucky Clover, and this is another way that we get tremendous value out of our adventures. The Clover copying our adventure spells is a big deal, and this is another reason why one-for-one strategies can't keep up with us, because if we're doing things like using Fae of Wishes to get multiple cards from our sideboard, people usually just get buried in the card advantage that comes from that. So yeah, Lucky Clover is super important in the deck, and kind of the core of the strategy. So now around those, to take advantage of those, we have our adventure creatures. So let's go through those. Fae of Wishes is just a really solid card. I think it's better than a lot of people think it is. One of the underrated aspects of this card is that it's just a 1/4 flyer for 2 mana. And this does a really good job of protecting us in like the mono red aggro matchups, for example, where it's often important to just get a blocker down. But also it can just do things like block a Brazen Borrower and kill it. It's very good against Flyers decks. So it's just a very strong card in general. Can even pressure Planeswalkers sometimes if you need it to. But one of the main reasons we're playing it obviously is for the sideboard access. So the combination of Fae and Lucky Clover means that we can start to get multiple cards from the board. So that becomes pretty disgusting. So we'll talk about the board a little bit later here. Let's next talk about Brazen Borrower. This is another adventure creature which ends up giving you tremendous value when you get Lucky Clover out. The main thing that we're looking for here is tempo and mana advantage. So let's say your opponent resolves, it's just some modest thing. Let's say your opponent spends 4 mana to resolve 2 permanents. If you have a Lucky Clover out, you can spend 2 mana to return both of those to their hand. It starts to scale pretty disgustingly. So like let's say your opponent casts their Lovestruck Beast and then they, cast a Questing Beast or something like that. And if you can just return both of those for 2 mana, it can be really hard for the opponents to catch up and get back in the game. This is also an important card against cards like Nissa, which the deck otherwise can struggle to deal with. So this isn't an answer to Nissa, but it's definitely a way to slow that card down, especially if a person's trying to play it on curve. So yeah, Brazen Borrower is just a really crucial part of the deck. Now, for our removal suite, it's basically Bone Crusher Giant and hoping to double up the Stomp Adventure using Lucky Clover. And so this is what we rely on to, basically sweep the board against small aggro decks like Mono Red. This card can often just single-handedly shut down the Mono Red aggro deck's game plan. But even other decks like, Mono Black aggro, sometimes even Mono Green, this card can do real work. And then once you get some clovers down, it can really, you can finish off Planeswalkers with this. You can even finish off your opponent with this. So one of the mistakes that's easy to make in this deck is to keep playing Bone Crusher to control the board, when sometimes you have like 2 or even 3 clovers down and you can actually just burn your opponent out. So keeping an eye on your opponent's life total is a really critical part of playing this deck, because we have several ways to burn people out. Bone Crusher is one of them. We also have Fling in the sideboard, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. But that's actually a fairly common way that we end the game, is by some combination of burning our opponent with the Bone Crusher and then flinging to finish the job. So yeah, Bone Crusher is a super important card in this deck. And then Lovestruck Beast, another adventure creature here. Now we get the value out of this one by getting a bunch of 1/1s on the board. And being able to double up on the Heart's Desire adventure is really important, because oftentimes people will try to slow down or stop the Lovestruck Beast by killing the 1/1. When you get a bunch of them, it can make that a lot harder. And then it also just clogs the board against aggro decks. So yeah, this is also a very, very, very important card. So this card, the deck wins in a number of ways. And one of the wonderful things about playing this deck is that we do actually have a lot of different ways that we could potentially win the game. Sometimes you just have a curve where you find yourself with a couple of Lovestruck Beasts out, and you're just beating your opponent down with some undercosted 5/5s. So, don't be afraid. Like, if you're looking at your board state and you realize that you're looking like the aggro plan, don't be afraid to just start swinging and get the job done. One of the tricks to playing Clover is figuring out whether you're playing an aggro plan, whether you're playing a control plan, whether you're playing a value plan or an attrition plan. It's one of the things that makes the deck difficult, because you can end up in all of those roles just depending on the matchup and depending on what you draw. So the last adventure creature here is Beanstalk Giant. This is one of the only ways that we ramp in this deck, but boy, is it a good one. So Fertile Footsteps is not that impressive of a ramp spell when you just get one of them, but as soon as you have one or more Lucky Clovers out, this card becomes bonkers. Now, one thing to remember is that if you have 2 clovers out, then you're actually mana neutral to cast the Fertile Footsteps. So it costs you 3 mana, but with 2 clovers out, you get 3 untapped lands, and they are untapped, so remember that. And then, of course, if you have 3 or 4 clovers out, then you're actually gaining, you gain mana when you cast this. Like, you gain untapped mana on your turn when you cast this. So that's, pretty awesome aspects of this card. So this is one of our main finishers in the deck. Sometimes it's just a big creature that you swing with to end the game, but oftentimes this is a fling target, and so once you've used this to ramp out a bunch of lands, you'll often end up with like 15 to 20 lands, and sometimes one fling is enough to get the job done. However, we do have other ways to kind of go even further over the top. So we'll get to that when we talk about the sideboard. Lastly, let's talk about the lands here. So one of the things you'll one of the things you'll notice about this deck is that we're running fewer than average multi-lands, and we're running a lot of basics. And the reason for that is that we're leaning on these Beanstalk Giants to ramp us. And you'll find with this deck that if you have any number of clovers out and you start casting Beanstalks, you start going through your basics really quickly. And so we actually want to have enough of them in the deck to support this plan and make sure that we're not running out of basics when we cast our beanstalks. It's very rare that you end up doing that, and usually when you get to that point in the game you win, but we just want to make sure. So the deck actually runs 15 basics, which is really high. It's a really high number of basics to run, but it ends up working out pretty well. Alright, so now let's go into the sideboard. Now, oh, actually, you know what? There are a couple of main deck slots that I forgot to mention. So this deck runs basically in the stock build of this deck. We run 2 flex slots. And the flex slots are basically, you know, whatever you feel like the deck is missing, you can put in here. Now, I will say I have some opinions on this. Some people talk about putting like more ramp in these slots, playing cards like Oro or cards like Cultivate. I would recommend against that. I don't think the deck needs additional ramp, so I wouldn't go that route. Even though Oro is a really strong card, one of the things that you actually don't realize about this deck is that not that many cards end up in the graveyard. A lot of your spells you cast the adventure side, and then it might take a while for you to actually get the creature down. So you might be like halfway through a game and you're still nowhere near escaping your Oro. And I don't think Oro is good enough just on the front side. So yeah, this is really not a very good Oro deck, so I would recommend against running those in this deck. Another card that people talk a lot about putting here is Nissa. Again, I think Nissa is kind of a trap, and I think one of the reasons for that is that Nissa is a very powerful card, but I don't think the deck needs power. Like, the deck's already got plenty of power. The deck's kind of got a lot of what Nissa does already. So the deck has a lot of mana acceleration. It has a lot of kind of card and creature advantage. You often end up flooding the board with random dorks anyway. You often end up with just a bunch of beasts and giants and 1/1s and stuff in play. And so I don't really think Nissa turns the tide a lot of the time. So even though it's a strong card, I'm kind of off it myself. So what I often choose to run in these slots is just cheap cards that kind of help me keep my game plan going along. So at the moment, I'm trying 1 Scorching Dragonfire to just help out in the aggro matchups, because I've been playing a lot of best of 1, and this is really good against mono red, for example. And then of 1 Mind is just a cheap draw spell. So you can usually get this off for 1 blue mana in this deck because you're making a bunch of humans from the beast, and the Edgewall Innkeeper is a human, and then the rest of your cards are non-humans. So yeah, most of the time this ends up being a really efficient draw spell. Just kind of keeps you hitting your land drops and finding the stuff that you need. So then the last card that I forgot to talk about, which is an important one, is Escape to the Wilds. So Escape to the Wilds is probably better in this deck than in any other deck. And the reason for that is it's kind of deceptive. But the reason it's so good in this deck is for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps you find your Innkeepers and your Clovers. So sometimes you're just digging to get these cards. And so Escape to the Wilds is a great way to find them. Number two is that most of the time when you exile, when you use this, you'll end up with a bunch of cards of various mana costs in exile, and you usually don't have enough mana to cast them all, so you have to be a little bit selective about what you want to get from it. But in this deck, you often will expose a bunch of adventure creatures, and the adventure creatures, the adventure side is often very cheap, and so what you might end up doing, what you should do probably a lot, is you'll expose a bunch of these, and then if you just cast all of the adventures before they go away, then you get the creature side just hanging out. So it's basically like you get a free creature out of the deal. And so that's a really just good way to increase your card advantage. And then on the subsequent turns, whenever you have free mana, you can start casting these creatures from exile, especially if you have an Edgewall Innkeeper. That refills your hand, and then you can just churn through your deck. So this deck's really, you just want to draw a lot of cards, you want to ramp a lot, you want to get a lot of cards off Escape to the Wilds, just keep fueling your engine until you get a critical mass of lands out. And once you have enough lands out, you can start doing things like casting your Beanstalk Giant, going into your sideboard, and getting your finisher cards. So that's kind of the overview of the deck. Now let's talk about the sideboard, because it's very important in this deck. Because we rely so heavily on Fae of Wishes, and because we're often getting multiple cards from the board, the sideboard options are particularly important to talk about in this deck. So basically, your sideboard in this deck is going to be a combination of cheap answers for problem permanents and problem spells, and then a few ways to just kind of close out the game. So one of the things, like, this deck can sometimes have trouble closing if you don't have specific cards in the sideboard that help you get it done. So let's just go through it here. I have Tormod's Crypt as my preferred card of choice for graveyard hate. I've tried some other things like Grafdigger's Cage, for example. The problem with Grafdigger's Cage is it's too easy to kill with cards like Casualties of War or even Vraska. So I've actually lost a number of games where I resolved the Grafdigger's Cage, but my opponent destroyed it and then got their graveyard synergy anyway. So I've been unimpressed with that in this current meta, so I chose Tormod's Crypt. Another nice thing about it is sometimes you just want to Fey on 4 mana, and then you can immediately get your value out of this, so it's kind of important. Then we have some cheap interaction in the form of Unsummon. This is, again, just like you'll have 5 mana, and you'll just need to slow the game down, and so you'll Fey for your Unsummon. Unsummon just comes really in handy in a lot of spots. Red Cat Melee, another cheap way, especially in your mono-red matchups, to just, keep the game going along, not fall too far behind. Mystic Repeal, just dealing with enchantments. This is also very good against mono-red, actually, because it's a 1-mana answer to Anax, and it's an answer which doesn't leave behind any 1/1s, any satyrs. So Mystic Repeal is it's good against multiple enchantments, but it's particularly good against Anax. Shadow Spear is one of our main ways to gain life in the deck. So sometimes you find yourself, you've been kind of, fending off your opponent, building up your mana, building up your adventure creatures, and you'll often find these spots where you're a low life total, and you just need to gain a little bit of life to get back in the game. And so, putting a Shadow Spear on a Borrower or even a Fey of Wishes, getting in some swings can gain you that life. Sometimes you just put it on the Beanstalk Giant and attack, and your opponent can never beat you for all of the life gain. So yeah, Shadow Spear is a good one to get. It's also cheap. Notice a lot of these cards are cheap. It's because Fey of Wishes is expensive. 4 mana is expensive. And so oftentimes you just want a card which you're going to be able to cast immediately after you cast the Fey. So that's why there are so many cheap answers in the sideboard. Aether Gust, another important one. This can help you deal with a resolved Nissa, for example, or leave up if you suspect your opponent's going to cast a Nissa, or maybe a Casualties of War, which can be quite good against our deck sometimes. So yeah, being able to gust a Casualties is really good. And just one of the things this deck can struggle with is if the opponent resolves some kind of big, hard-to-deal-with threat, like a Korvold or a Nissa, or even a Questing Beast. Sometimes even if you expect an Embercleave, Aether Gust can be really good. So yeah, just still a solid card to get. Disdainful Stroke, very good against Embercleave, good against Ugin, good against Nissa, good against a lot of top-end threats, so a good thing to have access to. Negate needs no explanation, good counterspell. Okay, let's talk about Fling. So Fling is kind of one of the... this is one of the most important cards in the deck, in my opinion. I would highly recommend not taking this out of your sideboard. It might seem like kind of a silly card to have, and in most strategies it would be. But the thing is, this really is one of the most important ways to close out the game. You often end up with a Beanstalk Giant, which is like 10, 12, 15 power. And being able to fling it at your opponent to just close out the game in one turn can be really important. Now, there's a combo in this deck, which is Fling, Expansion, Explosion. We almost never cast the Explosion side of the spell in this deck, but the Expansion is important. So what this allows you to do is for 4 mana, you can fling your Beanstalk Giant, and then with the fling, you have to use full control here. With the fling on the stack, you then copy it with Expansion, and it'll actually, not only will it copy the fling, but it'll copy the damage that the fling is at. So let's say you have a 15 damage fling from your Beanstalk Giant. You'll copy that with Expansion, you get another 15 damage fling. So when you use this combo, especially with a Beanstalk Giant, but even with a Lovestruck Beast sometimes, you just double up the damage enough that you can kill your opponent from almost any life total. So I've had plenty of games where my opponent was just like crushing me. They were at 26 life. They had a bunch of permanents on the board. It looked like there was no way I could win. And I would just play a Beanstalk Giant, Fey of Wishes, Fling, Expansion Explosion, and you just finish the game in one turn. So it's always nice to have that combo kill as just another way to win the game. So I would not cut either of these from the sideboard either. Return to Nature, just a solid way to get rid of an artifact or an enchantment. This is a really good way to get rid of something like, maybe an Embercleave, or like some other decks will actually run things like the Great Henge, and Return to Nature is a really good way to get rid of that as well. Domri's Ambush is some of the removal that we use to take down bigger creatures or planeswalkers. So sometimes, your opponent has a Nissa and you just Domri's Ambush on your Lovestruck Beast to get rid of it. So it's one of the main ways that we deal with bigger threats in the deck, because otherwise we can struggle. Sometimes you just don't have enough stomps from your Clovers to get the job done. Storm's Wrath is just a nice pressure valve on aggro matchups, good against mono red sometimes, so just always a nice thing to have. Sometimes it even finishes off planeswalkers, which is nice as well. And your Lovestruck Beasts and your Beanstalk Giants survive the Storm's Wrath, so sometimes it just lines up really nicely. Okay, Chandra the Awakened Inferno is basically just a card you can use in counterspell matchups. So if your Flash opponent is trying to control the board, then you can just go and fetch this from the sideboard. I think a lot of people over-wish for this, like they get it more often than they should, because it's just a powerful card. But I usually only bring this out either if I really don't have anything else that I feel like getting, or in Flash matchups. Like, this is a pretty good card against something like Simic Flash. And then finally, Escape to the Wilds. Now, some might ask why we have 1 in the board and 3 in the main deck, and I think this is a really great way to do it, because first of all, 4 in the main deck often feels like too many. You just draw them a little bit too often. You can have these really awkward draws where you're looking for just some more interaction or more ways to ramp, etc. So 3 in the main is a really good number, but it's great to have 1 in the board as well. And one of the reasons is oftentimes you'll have a turn where the best thing for you to do with your mana is go into the board with your Fae, and you might actually not exactly know what you need. And Escape to the Wilds is such a good card in the deck that this is like, if you're ever in doubt as to what to get from the board, just get Escape. You basically can't go wrong with this card. It's an important card in the deck when you reach the mid game. So yeah, just a really solid choice. So this comes up a lot in the deck where you'll be on turn 4 or even later in the game, and the only really good thing that you can do is cast your Fae of Wishes, but maybe your opponent's not that much on the board, or maybe you don't have a clear idea of what you're going to get. And so cards like Escape to the Wilds it's just such a solid choice. You're basically never going to be sad that you got this one. Other cards that can be good if you're really not sure is maybe a Shadow Spear. It's just a good solid permanent to have on the board. In any matchup where your opponent's going to be casting expensive spells, you basically can't go wrong with Disdainful Stroke. Chandra, if you just feel like you need another threat. But again, don't go for this as much as you think you should. The number of games I've lost where I wished for Chandra and then never cast it, or did cast it and lost the game, is just tremendous. So this card's not as good as it looks, all right? So don't get stuck in that trap. All right. Well, that's the basic overview of the deck. So, I went into a bit of detail because I just feel like people sometimes just don't really know some of the ins and outs of the deck. So now I'm going to go and do some play on the ladder, and we can see how we do with it. So this is kind of a boring but definitely very keepable hand here. We have an Innkeeper, we have a nice curve, we basically have everything here, so feeling happy about that. Now, in a situation like this, when you don't know what your matchup is, it's usually safer to start with the Heart's Desire than with Edgewall Innkeeper, because your opponent could just have so many different things to be doing. And so you want to be very careful with your Edgewall Innkeeper because it's such a valuable card. This is usually the card which you'll cast in the mid game when you have a bunch of adventure creatures you've already used. So you want to save this until you can play it and immediately get value out of it by casting something else. So here I decided not to play out my Innkeeper or my Fae as a creature, and just to leave up Brazen Borrower. Now, if I knew what my matchup was, like for example, if I knew that I was playing against Simic Flash, what I probably would have done is would have played Edgewall Innkeeper turn 1, and then the Fae on turn 2 to draw a card. It's a very strong start to the deck, but it can be weak, like if your opponent has a Shock or, just something like that. Wow, so okay, not only does the opponent not play anything, but they leave up Serrated Scorpion. I'm just going to Petty Theft here. Slows my opponent down a bit, lets me use my mana. Alright, so let's see. My opponent's really not doing very much here. So I actually think now... So my opponent might have a Claim the Firstborn, which would be kind of a shame for my Innkeeper. But I think that that's okay here. They look like they might be a little mana screwed. So I'm just going to play my Fae out and draw a card here. I want to get max value out of my Innkeeper, because then next turn I can start casting my beasts. And if opponent wants to spend basically their whole turn casting something like Heartless Act on my Edgewall Innkeeper, then that's fine. Yep, okay, so they do Deadweight, which is not ideal, but we got a card out of it, so we're fine. Alright, so opponent's doing Ghost Form shenanigans. I'm not feeling particularly worried about this matchup. So... let's just get our beast going on here. Swing with the Fae. Pass to your opponent. So it looks like my opponent might be mana screwed. I don't know why you would run this card if you weren't actually planning to cast it. Oh no, are we bugging out? Come on, Arena. What are you doing to me? What are you doing to me, Arena? Wow, we're just gonna have to deal with this for the rest of all time. Yikes. This is... oh, thank God. Alright. Maybe I'm an idiot. So... alright, so what do we want to do here? Opponent's doing graveyardy things. This is one of those situations where I might actually wish for a Tormod's Crypt and then just play it for 0, right? That's totally fine. But the opponent... boy. The opponent is not getting much value from their yard yet, so I think I'm just gonna... let's start by casting of One Mine. This is a really great example of where you just get a sweet draw 2 for 1 mana, which basically can't be beat. I'm just going to think about what they could do next turn. I think I probably want to get aggressive here. Doubt they're going to block with anything. Let's just play another Love Struck and pass the turn. So as soon as the opponent starts doing graveyardy things, I'll go into my board and get a Tormod's Crypt. But alright, so now's probably the time. Alright, so despite the fact that that looks like somewhat of a bad interaction, my opponent just spent like basically all of the cards in their hand on their little janky combo here, so now we get to kind of wreck them. It's not going to feel good for them. And this is actually an example of a place where I might get Chandra, just because Chandra exiles things and it just might be very, very strong in this matchup. I don't think that my opponent has an answer to it. But we could just get Escape to the Wilds, right? Because this is basically like 5 cards off the top. So it's kind of hard to give that up. Let's just get Escape. There's no reason not to. Let's use this right now. Just get rid of all their cards, and we're just gonna say go. So the opponent has 2 cards left. They can't really have that much to do now. Yeah, so they're basically just scrambling to find something actually useful to do with themselves. If they attack with the Scorpion here, I'm just going to take 1 damage. Ooh, Scorching Dragonfire is a good one. That's a really good one. Alright, so let's start with an Escape. The only way we get punished here is if we don't get an untapped land off the top, but we almost certainly will. Almost certainly will. Alright. Very nice, very nice. So now we can actually just Bone Crush the Laris. And do we want to kill the Scorpion? It's an interesting question. No, we have the Dragonfire for that. Yeah, Dragonfire is better for that, so let's just go face here. I don't particularly feel like draining for 2 and then having that thing come back. It's kind of not my ideal vacation. Swing all because, I mean, we could block this with the Fae, but we're actually winning the damage race here. So I think I'm just going to try to get this game over with. The opponent's in a pretty rough spot here. I don't quite know what their plan is. Pretty aggressive attack from my opponent as well. Yeah, they're just super dead this game. GG's. Alright, so this hand is not great. It's a little slow, but we do have cards, we're on the play, so I think I'm going to keep it. Like, if we're playing against mono red, for example, I might just play out Fae turn 2 into Beast turn 3, and that's going to be a very, very, yeah, okay, so my opening is going to be very hard for them to punch through, because we're just going to have so many blockers on the board here. No attacks. This is one of the places where Fae of Wishes really shines. Alright, so the opponent's going in for the attack. We will block. Let's see what they have. They're going to have to use multiple spells here. So they'd have to do like Rimrock Knight Shock or double Rimrock Knight. Or, I don't know, I guess I could trade for... Well, let's see what they do. Alright, that was just an extremely poor attack from our opponent, is all that was. So, good job, opponent, good job. Alright, so we commit to the board. Again, no attacks. We're not going to win this game by chipping away with Fae of Wishes. We're going to win this game by controlling the board and overwhelming our opponent with value and just answering what they do. So that is actually kind of a shame because it turned off our of one mind. So I don't love that happened. However, we do have a wonderful opportunity to kill this Steamkin. The question in my mind is, do I shock excuse me, do I shock in order to get an extra land out here? I think the answer is no. I don't think that helps us that much. It's not really worth it to me. So let's just slay. Play this tapped. Pass the turn. So our opponent could still do a lot of damage here. Alright. So they're getting towards the end of their things to do here. So I think now I am going to shock. Gonna draw 2 here. Okay, so all this interaction is great. So now we just pass the turn. We have Borrower if they Embercleave. So let's see if that's their last card here. Looks like it's not. So we'll declare a block here. I'm planning on bouncing this, but let's see what they do. Alright, so basically we have the board locked up here. Lucky Clover was pretty much the best possible draw here. So now this is what we get to do, is we get to search up a blue mana, and let's see, what else do we need? Let's get up a red mana, keep him guessing. And now we get to leave up double Brazen Borrower, which is really a beating. Now I'm probably not going to borrow here unless they do something sketchy. So let's see what they do. So let's see, the last card would have to be another Bone Crusher Giant. Which is fine. Okay, it's a shock. It's fine. Okay, so the question here is, do I do a double bounce now? Or do I just... I want to play Beanstalk Giant next turn, so I won't be able to leave this up, so I am just going to do this now. Let's take out one of these. Just keep slowing him down, basically. Alright, so this is perfect, because now I get to play this into the giant. We get to draw a card, and we're in great shape. So even if the opponent rips an Embercleave here, it's really not going to do very much for them. Alright, so now all we're looking for at the moment is just like a Fae of Wishes to, or maybe an Escape to the Wilds to just really lock up this game. Well, there we go. We got what we wanted, so... do we do this now? I think we do. So we basically need to fade Embercleave for one more turn here. We could Fae and get like Escape plus Unsummon, or even Disdainful Stroke, so that would protect us against like a Torbran or an Embercleave. That's probably what I'll do, actually. So let's Fae. I was thinking about trying to win the game next turn, but I don't think we need to do that. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to get Disdainful Stroke. There you are. And we're going to get Escape to the Wilds. And then we're going to pass the turn. So we've basically shot off all of their good draws here. So the opponent can't get into the red zone without... Yep, there you go. So this is a classic example of where the deck looks more like a control deck than anything else. So when you're playing against mono red, you're definitely playing the control. You want to do things like, when you play against mono red, you want to do things like play out your Lovestruck Beast, even if you're not playing out the 1/1 first. You just need to get some big blockers down as quickly as possible, and then use your adventure cards to control the board from there. Alright, this hand is really borderline. This hand is also really matchup dependent. Because of the prevalence of aggro decks on the best of one ladder, I'm going to keep this hand, but this is a very borderline hand. So if our opponent goes like Mountain Fervent Champion, we'll feel pretty good about this. But if they go like, you know... Alright, so this is another red matchup, of course. Why would it not be? So, let's see here. I actually think, because they played Scorch Spitter, I'm going to lead with my untapped land here. So then next turn I'll play... Yeah, okay, this makes me regret a little bit playing my untapped land as opposed to my tap land. But I still think we're going to be fine here. So now the opponent has to decide what they want to do. The reason I played this way is that I can play a tap land and a 1/1 next turn as well. Alright, so we didn't draw an untapped land here, which is kind of unfortunate. So Steamkin on 2 wasn't best, but as long as my opponent doesn't go like triple 1-drop, I'll have some insane Escape to the Wilds turn. I mean, some insane light up the stage turn. I think we'll still be able to kill this Steamkin. So it's possible I played this wrong, but I think for anything except turn 2 Steamkin, I think it was the right play. Alright, well this is great for us here. This is just great for us. No regrets. So... Man, I wish I could play Bone Crusher here. I wish I could afford to play Bone Crusher on the Steamkin. But if... Let's see what happens here. So if they play a spell in response, if they play like a shock in response to my Bone Crusher, then they get to keep their Steamkin, which is just disastrous for me. It would have to be exactly... No, it could also be the Rimrock Knight. So yeah, I'm just gonna do this. I could have taken a risk there and played Bone Crusher, but I just it would have been such a blowout if it had gone poorly. Alright, so now we're gonna really need to draw our untapped land here. Please. Nope. Alright. Well, this is rapidly going downhill. 2-lander on the draw, just not getting there. We've done a really, really good job of controlling the board so far, but if we don't draw our lands, this is going to be over very quickly. Alright, not the worst. Not the worst, but definitely not the best. So they can Embercleave here no matter what, so... See who they put it on. If they're smart, they'll put it on the giant. Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. So we'll let that resolve. And see if they do anything else greedy here. Man, and they had Infuriate? That is infuriating. Alright. So, okay, so if we Infuriate this, we'll go to 9. And then... So if I bounce this, I take 2. I take 7 from Torbran, I go to 2. Alternately, if I bounce Torbran, I go to 1. Yeah, I think I have to bounce Torbran here, unfortunately. Because if I bounce the Bone Crusher, I end up at 2, and then next turn they just... I don't think there's any way I can win this game. Simple case of mana screw, unfortunately. I think that we were well positioned. We were well positioned that game if we didn't just totally screw out. Multiple Lovestruck Beasts are just really, really good against mono red. But it was a risky hand, and that's what happens sometimes when you keep risky hands. Alright, this opener is really not particularly strong. Alright then. Opponent liked their opener even less. Against the mono red meta we've been seeing on the ladder, this hand is great. So hands like this are really good in this deck. You have a lot of interaction. You have a lot of... Like, we have interaction followed by gassing up our hand again, so it's really just perfect. So kill the collector. Here, let's see. We could just play the giant, I suppose. I think giant's good. Giant trades with questing beast. So let's just do that. I was thinking about playing a 1/1 and then leaving up Dragonfire, but I think this is better. So this Dragonfire is going to be a perfect answer to the Skoos. We could also double bounce that board here, which looks somewhat appealing. Let's just do that. There are 2 creatures in the yard. Yeah, this is good. I think this is fine for us. We'll just play the Clover and say go. So we have Dragonfire and Borrower up, so depending on what the opponent does here, we can start to dispense a wrecking. We'll just take it here. Alright, so the opponent is playing quite well around Brazen Borrower here. So this isn't their first rodeo, and unfortunately Scorching Dragonfire doesn't get them. So, well played, opponent. The good news here, the bad/good news is that we don't have anything particularly useful to do, so we don't get punished that hard. Alright, so now we can Dragonfire here, which feels good. So, my opponent could have tapped their Druid in response and saved their Skoos, but then we would have got to bounce them out. So overall, this works out quite well. They have an extremely good answer to the borrowers here. Actually, let's let them go to blocks here. Alright, so they're not Ember Cleaving here. So we would really like to draw land next turn. Alright, Terror of the Peaks is a magic card. That's a very good magic card. So yep, we're basically escaping to see if we can find an answer here. So Clover into Bone Crusher will kill Terra, but we're gonna take 10 damage this turn. So that's unfortunate. Or is that lethal? That's lethal. Wow. GG's. GG's indeed. Let's see if we can get a matchup against a non-red opponent here. This hand is excellent. Excellent. So basically any hand which has enough lands into a turn 2 Clover into adventure creatures is just an insta keep. Alright, so it looks like this video is basically just going to be an educational video about how to play against mono red with Temur Adventure. But what do I expect on the best of 1 ladder? Oh, okay, Rakdos. Rakdos is nice. I'm fine with that. So opponent has an extremely aggro start. Alright, we got the dream right here, which is turn 2 Clover into turn 3 Beanstalk. It's just one of the best openings in this deck, bar none. So let's get a red. And another blue here. So let's see, in a red-black shell, the opponent actually might be playing Village Rites. So as a result of that, to play around that card, I'm just going to kill these now, as opposed to waiting. The opponent's going to have a hard time. We've basically had the nut draw here, so kind of hard for our opponent to do anything about it. Play out our beast. Leave up Bone Crusher. Pass the turn. Alright, that is a thing you can do. Stormfist Crusader A. Alright, so the question is, do we let them untap with that? I think we have enough going on that I just want to tap all of my mana. We probably have higher upside plays that we could possibly make, but we just have so much gas coming down the pike that and I'm gonna say no attacks here. Because like if my opponent has an Embercleave, I want to be able to double block and kill that giant. Alright, so opponent plays out their whole hand. So now the question is, we could Fey here, but we can't get much useful. That Midnight Reaper is kind of annoying. It's kind of annoying. Yeah, let's Fey. Let's see what we got in the sideboard here. So I think what I want to do here is I want to kill their knight. Gonna get Escape to the Wilds because it's just a solid card. And then we have a number of options here. Okay, I'm actually gonna get Chandra here. It's gonna be a good removal spell. And we'll say go. Alright, so the reason I put the counter on the beast is that now if they Embercleave, I can block the Bone Crusher with the beast and it will trade. Alright, so they ride on my beast. Let's see what they do now. Alright, well, my opponent is super dead to Chandra here, so... You know what's coming. You know what's coming, opponent. Alright, so we have a super powerful planeswalker, we have a blocker, opponent has a Reggie, that's fine. I'm not in the least bit worried about Rotting Regisaur here, so let's see what we spike off of Escape to the Wilds. Okay, so Brazen Borrower should basically lock up this game, I think. Actually going to shock this land in. The reason is because it lets me cast this. And then it lets me get... So I actually get 4 mana here. Let's go blue. Blue. Red. Green. So now this lets me leave up. Actually, so I could borrow them. I think I actually just want to kill... I'm just gonna kill Rotting Regisaur here. Actually, hold on. I can just kill my opponent. See, now this is an example of a time when you want to control the board, but you just kill your opponent. So we're going to deal them 8 here, and then Chandra's going to kill them during their upkeep. Fae of Wishes kills them as well, so... Alright. Put my opponent through a little unnecessary pain and suffering there, but such is life. Alright, so this hand is fine. We have Innkeeper into Fae. This is actually interesting. So if they have exactly... If they have a removal spell, they can kill my Innkeeper here, so I actually don't want that to happen. So in lieu of that, I'm actually gonna just play a human. We'll play the Innkeeper later. It's interesting here. I think I'm actually going to do this. So I think what I want to do now is I'm gonna play off curve a little bit here. I'm gonna go turn 3 Innkeeper into Fae. I'm taking damage from my lands, which is unfortunate. But I think we're soon going to get to a point where the only really hard punish on this turn is if they drop Questing Beast. Alright, Scooz is fine, we can deal with that. I think I'm gonna chump here, just to soak up a little extra damage. Alright, so we draw a third tap land, which is really not ideal. Let's play this first, shall we? So, Scooz is just a 2/2 here. So fortunately the opponent doesn't seem to have a really strong follow-up here. So we've gotten a little lucky, all told. We've gotten a little lucky with how this is played out. But I will take it. Play a dock. Draw 2 more cards. Alright, so the slight gamble we took by playing this match more slowly is paying off here. So let's see what the opponent comes up with next. Looks like they're flooding and just drawing the awkward side of their deck here, so we got a little lucky here. Little lucky. I mean, we are flooding, so there is that too. Let's see what else we can get here. Okay, Bone Crush is nice. So now we just pass the turn. So the opponent's now just very, very far behind. These pelt collectors are eventually going to become a problem. This is a tough one. This hand really needs a clover. You know what I mean? This hand could really use a clover. It's kind of unfortunate, actually. It's really unfortunate. So, Alright, let's just send that back to the hand. See what we draw. I would like my kingdom for a clover right now. Wow, okay. The opponent's just not here for it. Opponent's just not here for it. Alright, this hand is fine. Not great, but keepable. We're not going to lead off with the turn 1 Innkeeper because we're unlikely to cast these as the actual flyers anytime soon. Alright, so here we finally get to play against a more mid-range deck. Now unfortunately we're kind of woefully unprepared here because we don't have a Clover. That's the card that really we're going to lean on in matchups like this. I think I'm just going to play my tap land. I don't think there's much they could play next turn that I would want to borrow here. So the real question is if we play out the Edgewall Innkeeper. I think we don't. I usually end up regretting it in these Sultai matchups when I play it out. So let's see what the opponent does. We're probably going to save these for like Nissa or maybe an escaped Oro. Yeah, so no reason to leave our borrower here. But we're already very far behind against this deck, so we really need to find one of our value engines here. Alright, so they can play Nissa next turn. So unfortunately, we just have to leave up the borrower. This is one of our main ways to slow Nissa down. It doesn't deal with her, but it at least makes them lose their tempo. But it's not looking good for us. It's not looking good for us. We're probably going to lose this game. Our hand just wasn't strong enough to beat. And our opponent seems to have had everything that they've needed here. So it's kind of unfortunate. Get another blue here. So we're going to borrow again. But we really need to draw something good. I don't even really know at this point what we're looking to draw. I mean, a Lovestruck Beast, to be honest, would be fine. Let us block these stupid lands.
Behold, nature's true power.
Arboreal Grazer getting in there. Alright, well, in addition to them having a very solid draw, our draw has been very mediocre here. Alright, we get a Fae of Wishes. It's a little bit too slow here. I'm trying to think. Boy, it would have been nice to have drawn this at the beginning of the turn, because then we could have gotten an Ether Gust. I think I'm actually going to do this, because it draws us another card and it also blocks a land. Because otherwise we're going to take 9 next turn, and that's just too much damage. So our opponent will have access to up to 4 more mana here. Alright, looks like they're not holding up much. Maybe a Mystical Dispute. Alright, so drawing nothing here is probably the death knell of this game. They get to untap with Nissa, and that's kind of the nightmare scenario here. So this is what we do. We're looking for interaction here. Like a third Brazen Borrower. Alright, well we did find it. We did find it. So this is unfortunate I can't cast this because I need to borrow here. Man, we are living on the edge. We are living on the frickin' edge here. We're gonna need to top deck something good. Alright, so opponent throws away their Grazer. I think that's not a good idea, to be honest. Because now we can potentially kill that Nissa if they don't play another thing that can block a flyer. I usually like to save these to protect my Nissa instead of protect my life total. Because that life total's fine right now. So maybe they have like a... Oh, okay. So that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing, is just cleaning me out here. So that's gonna pretty much be GG's. There's basically there's nothing we can do here that's gonna save us from both Ugin. Wow. Well, if that's not emblematic of how this game's been going, I don't know what is. GG's. So they had a great draw, we had a very weak draw. So in best of 3, I'd probably send this hand back, but in best of 1, I think this is fine. Although we don't have a second blue. This hand is really borderline. Really borderline. We're definitely relying on drawing into good things here, because this hand's not going to take us there on its own. I'll mulligan this. So this is a better hand, especially on the draw, because we have the chance of going turn 2 Clover into turn 3 Beanstalk, which is amazing. So I think what I'm going to do here is... we don't know what we're up against, so I'll send back the Dragonfire. We're statistically likely to play against aggro, but... Alright. So we have 2 more draw steps to find our 3rd untapped land. Needs to be untapped. And we're in business. So unless opponent is main decking Artifact Hate, which I don't even know what there is in black, we're going to get to go off this game. Alright, the opponent, wow. 2 more Clovers? Madness. Alright, so one might be tempted to get greedy here, but I am not at all going to get greedy here. I am going to kill both of these right now. Or am I? How much worse could it get? How much worse could it get? Alright, I guess I am going to get greedy, actually. Because next turn, we get to go 4 Clovers, or 3 Clovers into Bone Crusher. Surely that's worth waiting for, right? So if they have a way to sack this and get it back immediately, then maybe that's a problem. Alright, so they are... Alright, so my waiting did actually punish me here. Waiting did end up punishing me. So learn from my mistakes, people. Learn from them. So the question is, do we want to kill the Eidolon or the Flyer? Probably the Flyer. We just need to stay alive. Vulgar display of power. So next turn we can literally Fey for 4 things, and then hard to imagine how the opponent comes back from that. Okay, another Fey. Alright, so this is probably going to prompt an instant scoop here. I'd be surprised if it didn't. Alright, so we're going to get escape. Crypt. Repeal. And Shadow Spear. So now we have the choice to play out the spear and leave up Repeal, or to just play Fey of Wishes. I think I like this plan better. Let's see what the opponent does here. So now we just have an instant speed response to any kind of graveyard shenanigans they might want to do. So Shadow Spear is what's going to kind of keep us in this game. Alright, so now that nothing's happening here, I'm just going to put this away. I expect to find an answer to this Eidolon very soon here. Wow, another Fey? That's kind of ridiculous. We're just going to escape here. Alright, so now we just play a blocker. So if they have like double Maya's Grasp or something, they could maybe get us here. If they attack with both of these... Nope. Alright, so the opponent has reached the mega dead phase of the game here, so let's just have some fun. We're just gonna do things until our opponent scoops, basically. What do we even need here? Just gonna get like a bunch of blue. This deck's usually pretty blue hungry. Alright, let's go edge wall. Edge wall. Crush some bones. Surprised the opponent is still playing, to be honest. Start gaining some life back here. We have Dragonfire up. So our opponent is just hard locked out of this game. I don't even know what they could play at this point that would have any amount of relevance anymore. Alright, so this is where we Tormod's Crypt here. No, you shall not get anything with Call of the Death Dweller. Thank you very much. And we're going to leave our Dragonfire up. So let's see. Can we kill him this turn? Okay, 14 mana. So we're one shot from doing our double kill sideboard trick. So in that case, let's gain some life. Our opponent is a glutton for punishment at this point. Let's draw some cards. Make some more 1/1s. Leave up Dragonfire. Alright, so this denies them the card draw. And now they are dead. Alright. So, what did we learn about Clover here? My takeaway at the moment is that there's a lot of monocolored aggro on the ladder, and I think that Clover is very well positioned against all of it. We have so much interaction, we have so much value, we have so much card draw that we just tend to control the board enough in the early turns and then just go over the top in the late turns. Having access to cards like Fae, Lovestruck, and Bone Crusher to block in the early turns is also really, really crucial. This is also why, if you notice, I run a copy of Scorching Dragonfire in the main, is because it's just like that extra interaction. So again, like I value this card more than a Nissa or more than some other things that it could be, because it's just such a solid answer to the things that give us headaches in the early turns. Once we get to the later turns of the game, we have to be very unlucky to not have just super over-the-top powerful things to do. So that's why I devote my flex slots to, you know, cards that are cheap, that just kind of help us to keep moving along and not die, hopefully. So yeah, the deck's very strong in best of one against all of the aggro. I would highly recommend it, and I hope you learned something from playing this video. Feel free to listen to the podcast, ArenaCraft Podcast, and also go and check out Aaron Gertler, because he is a boss. All right, take it easy.